Can't get enough tugging? Go to extratug.com for exclusive content that YouTube won't let me post, and also a bunch of other cool things. Okay, thank you. Alright, I was gonna wear this mask for this video, and I also had a wrestling onesie singlet that I was gonna wear, but it didn't get here in time, and also the camera won't focus if I wear this mask, so I'm gonna put my shirt back on, I think. What a bummer. Seriously, I was excited for that bit. Anyway, time travel back to 2013, and Donald Trump just got inducted into the World Wrestling Entertainment Hall of Fame. Things were different back then. And then fast forward to now, and he was double elected the president of these United States. And in genuine honesty, I don't know which of those accolades is a bigger achievement in American culture. Whether you love pro wrestling or you live your life ignoring the squared circle, its impact on American culture is shockingly massive. Wrestling has come a long way since greased up Greeks fought naked in 700 BCE. Today, it's $1 billion business, and also extremely homoerotic, but that's a video for Extra Tug. Pro wrestling and the WWE is a unceasing money-making machine. One where WWE star John Cena must issue an apology to China after a geopolitical snafu, and where former WWE CEO Linda McMahon is appointed as administrator for the Small Business Administration by none other than the WWE Hall of Famer and US President Donald Trump. All of those things happened. That's all true. The world is a nightmare. Some people think pro wrestling is fake, but regardless of the legitimacy of the Hogan versus Savage storyline, its consequences are very real, which makes this weird steroid-injected soap opera way more important than you may realize. Grease up, Tugomaniacs. It's time to jump into the world of pro wrestling. And at this point in the script, I was supposed to say, stop looking at my bulge, but the f***ing singlet never came, so I can't say that. Okay, so picture this. You're in college or high school, and everyone around you is hitting the electric pacifier. They're all addicted to that sweet, habit-forming vapor. And if peer pressure gets the best of you, well, you're gonna be next on the chopping block. Don't you wish there was an alternative that could get you and your homies turned away from such a harmful habit? A device that literally has none of the destructive habit-forming chemicals, but also gives you delicious flavors and helps with oral fixation? Well, my God, let me sell you a product. Today we're talking about Fume once again. Fume has created an award-winning flavored air device. I've talked about them a lot before, and some of you in the comments think that I am promoting a vape, which is insane. This is like the exact opposite of that, so let me explain. It's nicotine-free, vapor-free, guilt-free, and completely non-toxic. It's a replacement for that thing that people are struggling to kick, okay? There's no vapor, just flavored air that tastes good, like crisp mint or orange vanilla. And yes, people may think that you're blowing a fancy whistle, but then they'll ask you, why do you have such a fancy whistle? And you'll explain to them what Fume is, and now you have another friend. So it's, you know, Fume does a lot for a lot of people. Fume continuously invests in third-party studies to make sure their products are safe too. So you know that you're not accidentally buying a lie. And this isn't a lie. They're not lying. Neither am I. This holiday season, you can give the gift of better habits with Fume. Head to tryfume.com/BigTug and use code BigTug to get a free Fume topper when you order the Journey Pack. It's the perfect addition to make your gift just a little bit more special. And if you're lucky, you could even win one of Fume's limited edition gold-plated air devices, which is insane. Once again, head to tryfume.com/BigTug or use the QR code on your screen to get going on your new Fume product today. Thank you, Fume, for making something that does this. It's really satisfying and I appreciate it. So wrestling in a few different forms has been around for millennia. Cave drawings depicting wrestling date back to 3000 BCE, we think. Once again, could be gay sex. And it even was an event at the original Olympics in 708 BCE. It seems like since day one, fellas have been looking for an excuse to give each other really hard hugs in the mud. And this traditional style of mud hugging is, it's kind of boring, but people still do it. You can find people still keeping the old school culture alive by competing in high school competitions, or if they're good enough, competing at an Olympic level. This is that sport where people grab each other, and then they do that for a while until the ref says stop, and then they stop and start again, and then they win as many points as they can. I'm already sleepy. Where's the fanfare? You know, where's the steel chairs? Where's the extremely dramatic pre-match interview where the one guy threatens a wife and children? It's just athlete's foot and singlets, and that's some people's cup of tea, but I'm an American. I don't drink cups of tea. I drink light beer and heavy energy drinks. Fortunately, the French took a look at wrestling and thought to themselves, could we make this stupider? And they did. The French did what they were supposed to do. The real pro wrestling began in France in the early 19th century when wrestlers started traveling with carnivals. They were basically the entertainment you got after gawking at the bearded lady in the freak show, and oh boy, was it entertainment. You see, back in the day, normal people couldn't satiate their bloodlust by logging onto fightporn.com and watching some high school teenagers duke it out in a bathroom. No, you'd either just go to war or, I don't know, beat the piss out of the poor kid on the block. There really wasn't that much outlet. But the French carnies saw this opportunity and ran with it. Jean, and I'm not even gonna try to pronounce that last name, created the first organized wrestler circus troupe in 1848. And here there was but one rule: no penis punching. There was actually several rules, but but it was a big contribution for him to say you can't punch below the belt. Still viewed as a legitimate sport, this style of wrestling would become known as Greco-Roman, which is the style most closely associated with, quote, real wrestling, you know, the boring kind. Performers took on names like Edward the Steel Eater or Gustav the Bone Wrecker, and alliteration first, guys. Gustav the Bone Breaker, please. Wrestling started to become popular all across Europe, eventually making its way to America after the Civil War. And much like a dead car battery, it's no shock that wrestling in America was a match made in heaven. That analogy only works for the first half of that sentence. By the early 20th century, its popularity rivaled that of boxing and baseball, and in 1911, 30,000 fans packed Kaminsky Park to watch a championship match. But even in this era, wrestling was fake. They faked the matches. With scripted sequences and people taking falls, it really was just a way to fill seats and make a bunch of money. But this paved the way for what wrestling would become, and that, my friends, is batshit insanity. Because wrestling has its roots in the carnival, they use really colorful jargon when using terms in their business. Developed over a century ago, this coded language is still in the lexicon of wrestling to this day. Up first, we have kayfabe, and that's one of the biggest words that these wrestlers use. Kayfabe is the idea that you present the matches and the wrestlers as real. It's lying, really. It just means lying. But the concept of kayfabe is what makes wrestling work in its entirety. Early promoters demanded that wrestlers basically live by this code, to the extent that feuding wrestlers had to keep up kayfabe and appear to still be enemies in public. They even gave, like, actual news interviews in character to drum up business. Kind of like the old Chinese man in The Prestige. He's living the trick. And I understand that the Venn diagram between WWE fans and people who have seen The Prestige is two separate circles, but please stay with me. But without kayfabe, people wouldn't be able to buy into the pageantry and gaslighting that fuels the WWE, so it's extremely important. Next up, we got the face and the heel. Face slash heel. In wrestling, the good guys are called the face or baby face, and the bad guys are called the heel. Why do they make the terminology so complicated? Well, dangerous questions like that will get you a folding chair in the face, so shut the up. A face is a goody two-shoes who never breaks the rules and tells kids to stay in school. Often they're extremely patriotic and have a good moral compass that somehow lets them punch people in the face. In essence, they're superheroes, but much like Superman, at the end of the day, sticking to a moral ethos is extremely boring, so people get pretty tired of these guys. Now the heel, on the other hand, the heel's pretty cool. They cheat, they make fun of the audience, they wear crazy costumes. Well, all of them wear crazy costumes, but their costumes are even crazier. You'll catch them like smoking a cigarette on the way to the ring, and they'll hit a little kid's ice cream out of his hands. It's all to drum up the anger from the audience. And speaking of the anger from the audience, let's talk about the word heat. Heat is any negative reaction you get from fans. Heels live for the heat that they generate. It's the entire gig. If you gain heat by insulting the entire crowd, like you say, like people from Omaha or a bunch of inbred bastards, that's called cheap heat. But you just want to get as many people booing and hissing at you as possible, aka heat, in order for the good guy to come in and firmly shove your face in his ass. It's very late at night, I'm sorry. Then we have getting color, which is an insane concept. Getting color is intentionally cutting yourself, often in the face, with a razor. They actually do this. It's also known as juicing, gigging, blading. It's got a bunch of words, but it all means the same thing. Slicing your face up, which I would say is like shocking. I would say it's a little bit off-putting. I always thought it was fake blood, but no, actually, they're actually bleeding from their faces. I mean, every single part of wrestling is fake, so you think they would fake the blood part, but no, they're actually using it. They just conceal the small blades in like their wristbands or headgear or whatever, and then they slice themselves up when they're out on the stage. And as someone who gets all fainty when the nurse pricks my finger to take my blood, I shout out to these heroes. I don't know how they do it. Then we got shoot. Shoot's another one. Shoot is when a wrestler goes off script and essentially pulls back the curtain for what's going on behind in the wrestling world. This could be like a tell-all book or an interview or like a legitimate fight out of character between two wrestlers. Shoot basically means real. It means, oh shit, this isn't fake anymore. But sometimes shoots are worked, which means it's faked. Works means fake. So sometimes shoots, which are kayfabe, shoots can be kayfabe because they're worked. This is confusing. People were actually upset to discover wrestling was rigged, and for good reason, especially because a lot of it involved high-stakes gambling. Whether it was placing wagers on matches or jumping into the rig to fight a pro wrestler, fans were understandably pissed to find out that wrestling screwed them out of money or a cash prize. Thank God we don't have to deal with rigging in any real sports nowadays. As the legitimacy of wrestling waned, three promoters in the 1920s known as the Gold Dust Trio updated wrestling's approach. They transformed the sport of grappling heavy, hour-long matches to body slams, suplexes, drop kicks, and full-blown punching, basically dropping any pretense that wrestling is anything else but a brawl. Also, I feel like I ran past the concept of the Gold Dust Trio. What a name. What a name for a group of people that brought back professional wrestling. That's insane. They called the new approach slam bang Western style wrestling, which yeah, that gets me so hyped. The result was a more engaging form of wrestling, one that slowly moved away from carnivals, seedy halls, and burlesque theaters to weekly bouts at bona fide sport venues. Now that we're at this part in the history, we gotta get into the nitty gritty of like the business side of this. So in the 1940s, the National Wrestling Alliance was formed. This was a unified governing body of wrestling that split North America into individual territories. Now, please don't get confused. This is not the NWA we're all familiar with. It's an old thing, and it has nothing to do with Ice Cube. Then the 40s saw the rise of televised wrestling, mostly because the TV was invented around that time. Many folks who otherwise would have overlooked wrestling were now being confronted with beefy men in tiny underwear being beamed into their living rooms every week. And get this, Americans loved it. We f***ing loved that shit. Wrestling would more or less keep the loose gentleman's agreement of the NWA for 4 decades, with dozens of promotions working together to create a unified, cohesive vision of professional wrestling in America. But then a major player came in and f***ed everything up, and that is the character of the 1980s. Arcades, big hair, Rubik's Cubes, cocaine. The ideals of the 60s and 70s, like government oversight and public programs, that shit was gone, brother. All that dork shit was replaced with Ronald Reagan's boner for deregulation and privatization, otherwise known as Reaganomics. And that works super well, and everything is better because of it. In 1982, Vince McMahon bought the WWE, then known as the WWF, from his father for $1 million. Now, there is a whole insane Netflix documentary about this man, and I advise you go watch it, and I'm gonna try my best to not tread over the same topics, but, you know, he's a pretty big piece of shit overall. But sadly, I cannot discuss the topic of wrestling without discussing Vince McMahon. He's intangibly intertwined with it. McMahon withdrew from the NWA, which was very not cool of him in hindsight. The whole NWA was built on, like, word of mouth and trust. There was no contracts being signed, and McMahon took advantage of that fully. And then he doubled down and went to work demolishing the previously established territories. The WWE traveled across the country and took on rival promotions in their own backyards, while poaching their talent like Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, and Rowdy Roddy Piper, with big paychecks and promises of better, stronger ladders to use as weaponry. While the old guard was appalled by this behavior, they were also the authors of their own fate. Wrestling hadn't seen much innovation over the half-last century, and McMahon used his all-star talent to lead into the campy show business side of wrestling. Today, McMahon is reviled in many circles. He's been accused of some pretty serious sexual misconduct. Seriously, go watch the Netflix documentary, holy f***. But his vision of the future of pro wrestling is considered genius by some. During this time, the WWE and MTV became an unlikely duo, as pop star Cyndi Lauper teamed up with the WWE wrestlers for several music videos. She even appeared on wrestling broadcasts and managed wrestlers during events. And as a result, the WWE would air several matches on MTV. From merchandise to Saturday morning cartoons, wrestling was blowing up in the mainstream culture. All of this culminating in the greatest spectacle of sports entertainment, WrestleMania. In essence, WrestleMania was like any other supercard that a wrestling promotion would put on, where top talent and storylines collide into one big night of action. However, the WWE had both hype and celebrity on its side. The night before WrestleMania, Hulk Hogan and Mr. T hosted Saturday Night Live, and the next night they were fighting as a tag team in the main event. So all around a bit above the normal level of promotion, and for some reason, the Rockettes danced in the ring with Liberace. So everyone was showing up to these things, but also, might I say, as a heterosexual person, talking out to the homosexuals right now, is that not the gayest thing you've ever heard in your life? Like, culturally, the gayest thing. The Rockettes and Liberace on stage? I mean, could it get any culturally gayer? It drew millions of viewers, with another 19,000 watching live in Madison Square Garden. It was a pretty big gamble. Vince McMahon was putting the reputation of his company and also his wallet on the line. But I mean, it f***ing worked, so this one specific action Vince took was worth it. The territories would slowly fade into the background as the WWE became the only game in town. That is until the WWF showed up, and it put the WWE into a headlock that, using the same tactics that the WWE did. There are so many f***ing steps to this story, it's insane. So let's talk about World Championship Wrestling, or the WCW. For over a decade, the WCW was like the Android phone of wrestling. Everyone else is doing like high definition elbow drops in the group chat, while the WCW was posting like rage comic memes in a gross green bubble. But in 1995, billionaire Ted Turner decided to take on the WWE in earnest with his rival WCW promotion. Remember Ted Turner? The Nepo baby extraordinaire I talked about a few weeks ago when I was talking about TV? It's the 90s, so we're going to talk about him if we're talking about television. When Turner took offense to the way the WWE once broadcast on his network, he took a page out of McMahon's book. By offering massive paydays, he was able to acquire Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and Bret Hart, all leaving for the WCW. And he made Monday Nitro, which was supposed to take on the WWE Monday Night Raw. And also, despite all the petty shit that's going on in this video right now, let's give a big round of applause for the naming conventions in pro wrestling. Nitro, Raw, Mania. It makes me want to eat a rare steak and do a kickflip on a dirt bike. I'm f***ing excited. For the first time in McMahon's tenure, WWE was beginning to struggle. Known now in wrestling circles as the Monday Night Wars, Nitro beat Raw in the ratings for 84 weeks straight. Looking pretty rough for this f***ing overcooked microwave sausage in a tie. In an attempt to stop the bleeding, the WWE pivoted from kid-oriented characters and storylines to sexualized and violent shows meant for teens and adults. It's the 90s now, bitch. We say shit. As both the WCW and the WWE ramped up the raunch, the controversy surrounding wrestling's new direction was perfect fodder for TV news crews. With competition driving both companies to a more creative approach, it led to what many consider a second golden age for wrestling. In WWE lore, the mid-90s and the early 2000s was known as the Attitude Era. Hell yeah, f***ing put sunglasses on me, Chris. It spawned people like Stone Cold Steve Austin, the guy who drank a shit ton of beer and was famous for whooping ass and being perfectly bald. It also gave us Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Human Thumb, who implored if we could smell what he was cooking, who often called his opponents jabronis and candy asses. And now he does voices for Disney, which is an industry switch up so hard that we haven't seen the likes of it since McConaughey won an Oscar. And perhaps best encapsulating the Attitude Era was the wrestling stable Degeneration X. This group of black and neon-clad wrestlers perfectly channeled the vibe of a 13-year-old after shotgunning a Mountain Dew, and had teenage boys across this great nation chopping at their crotches and telling people to suck it. Eventually, the WWE won the Monday Night Wars, and after buying out the WCW and stripping it for parts, they softened their image and returned to a more family-focused program. However family-friendly a bunch of sweaty, shirtless dudes punching each other in the face can be. This is where we find ourselves once again crossing paths with the trailblazing spirit that is Vince McMahon. He took wrestling, squeezed it for every penny, and made it worth billions. And along the way, he created pipelines for fame and fortune for several human beings. Dave Bautista, once a ferocious wrestler, is now a goddamn guardian of the galaxy. John Cena is so famous that people forget he used to be a wrestler who claimed to be the doctor of thugonomics, which is such a tough watch. If you go back and watch him be a WWE wrestler, it's like what a nerdy white guy thinks a black person sounds like. It's a tough watch. And they also gave us international superstar The Rock, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who I believe probably will be president one day. And like, that's not a weird thing to assume because a lot of these guys end up in government. Jesse "The Body" Ventura was the governor of Minnesota, and now he's a crazy person. He's living down in the Baja. And Kane, a horror-themed wrestler billed as the devil's favorite demon, is currently the mayor of Knox County, Tennessee. Pro wrestling is by definition the American dream. It sells simple, black and white, right and wrong fairy tales to its fans, it promises fame to its employees, and even casts itself as a plucky upstart business in its own creation story. Wrestling sells upward mobility through pile drives and once again metal chairs to the forehead. But in reality, modern day wrestling is a fever dream of complete deregulation, and that's pretty much the entire crux of wrestling. As former WWE wrestler Ronda Rousey writes in her memoir, it's hard to sometimes know where the evil, unethical slimeball character of Vince McMahon played out for the camera ends and the actual questionably ethical Vince McMahon begins. That blurred line between character and reality is a recurring theme within the WWE universe. Conclusion, I don't know. It's kind of fun how ingrained wrestling culture is in America, and a lot of people don't realize that, but also, it's kind of shitty, so I don't know how to feel about that. And thank you to Fume for sponsoring today's video. Head to tryfume.com and use code BIGTUG when you order the Journey Pack for a free topper today. New videos every Wednesday and Saturday. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and shout out to all the extra tuglets who are able to support this channel by going to extratug.com and signing up for videos you can't get on YouTube because I say dirty things and talk about dirty things, but also you get a bunch of free perks and stuff like that, so thank you to them, and hopefully you join them. And I had a fun making this video. I'll take off my shirt one more time. I'm coming for your tugs. I'm gonna tug you. I don't know. I'll figure it out. Thank you.